Welcome to Easter Sunrise, brought to you by Wesley Mission. Broadcast on Channel 9, simulcast on radio and streaming online. Welcome the Superintendent of Wesley Mission, Reverend Stu Cameron.
Hello and welcome to this Easter Sunrise celebration. I'm Stu Cameron from Wesley Mission. I'm here on the shores of the Sydney Harbour. These are the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The Gadigal call this place Warung, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Easter is a very special time of the year where people from all walks of life and from all nations can come together to celebrate an event which is the hinge of history, Easter. Why do I say that? Well, the Christian faith declares that the death and resurrection of Jesus can lead to eternal life for us all, a gift of God we can receive freely. Throughout this Easter celebration, I'd like to encourage you to consider what the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ can mean for you. Jesus, God's one and only Son, lived among us, died for us, and was raised to life, creating a way for us to experience God's resurrection power, should we choose to receive it. We have a very special guest coming up later today. I'll be speaking with the inventor of the cochlear implant, Professor Graeme, and we'll be joined by some incredible Pacifica vocalists who are part of the Wesley Mission family called Soul Purpose. Now, if at any point during this program you have any questions about the Christian faith or anything you hear me say, please don't hesitate to be in touch. The contact details are on the screen now. We start our celebration today with Soul Purpose singing The Blessing.
The Lord bless you and keep you, make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace.
Lord bless you and keep you, make His face
Sole Purpose will be back with us a little later on today. Last year marked the 25th anniversary since the release of The Castle, the film voted Australia's best ever. The story of the Kerrigan's family battle against greedy developers and the government who want to compulsorily acquire their beloved suburban home to make way for an airport runway extension struck a chord back in 1997 and has ever since. Classic lines from the movie like, "Tell him he's dreaming," "That's going straight to the pool room," and "How's the Serenity?" have become as Australian as Vegemite. Australians love The Castle for a bunch of reasons, including the fact that it's about a family who'll do all they can to hang on to their home, that little weatherboard patch of the Australian dream, front and backyard included, their castle. We Australians love our homes. If anything, Australia's obsession with home ownership has strengthened further over the last 25 years. We all want our castle. Rising interest rates, spiralling rental costs, and the cost of living generally have, tragically, made that all the more harder. As recent Sydney immigrants, Sue and I don't own property in our new city, and we don't feel like we want to sell a kidney to buy one. But we do have our own castle, one on loan to us. Our wonderful Federation-style Roseville manse, where every Wesley superintendent like me has lived since the 1930s. Through pandemic lockdowns, our spacious home and roomy yard were godsends. Sue spends hours in the garden. Roses, camellias, hydrangeas, as well as many more hours at Bunnings, where our credit card gets some decent exercise and I at least get to enjoy a barbecue sausage. Through the pandemic season of transition, of disruption and isolation, our garden has been a source of solace, providing a distracting oasis through all the turmoil of these last couple of years. There's something about gardens that's good for harried and hurried souls. We know how blessed we are to have ours. One of my favourite artists is Claude Monet, the French impressionist famous for his distinctive paintings of garden and rural scenes. Monet had his own garden just outside Paris with flowers and ponds and water lilies. He would set up his easel outside and paint his surroundings, all the inspiration he needed. Monet's paintings are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, priceless masterpieces. Nevertheless, Monet himself once said, "My garden is my most beautiful masterpiece." It was Thursday in the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus courageously surrendered his will, and on Friday in a garden just outside Jerusalem's walls where Jesus surrendered his life to the cross. And on Sunday, nearby in the same garden where he was raised to life. In fact, the Easter story can be told and its meaning unpacked as we explore 4 very different yet interconnected gardens we find in the Bible. They are the Garden of Eden, or the Garden of Delight and Despair, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Garden of Sorrow and Tears, the Garden Tomb, the Garden of Victory and Triumph, and the Garden of the New Jerusalem, the Garden of Hope and Joy. Let's look at each in turn. First, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Delight and Despair. 25 years ago, Sue and I were living in Launceston in northern Tasmania. In early spring 1996, snow fell to low altitudes on the Great Western Tiers, less than an hour from our home. After parking our car, a friend and I spent a few hours walking under cloudless, blue skies, alongside a river bubbling with snowmelt. All around us was the green of ancient myrtle forest, psychedelically coloured fungi clinging to the tree trunks and branches. As we climbed higher, we began to crunch our way through snow, first just underfoot, then ankle deep. The impossible stillness, the azure blue of the sky above, the majesty of the forest, the steady thrum of the river beside us, all of it combined to fill us with awe. Our hearts were lifted and our gaze open-mouthed. You may recall a moment when, like me, more than 25 years ago, the beauty and wonder of creation took your breath away. The creation story in Genesis is written as a poem, a rhythm of 7 stanzas. At the end of each day, each stanza, as God creates light and darkness, land and sea, plants and trees, the sun and stars, fish and birds, animals and human beings, at the end of each day, God steps back and surveys his handiwork and says, "That's good." When it's all done, before God rests from his work of creation, having placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, at the heart of it all, he says, "It's very good." The beauty of the world, it bears the fingerprints of God's original blessing. Elizabeth Barrett Browning puts it this way: "Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God." Tragically, original blessing gave way to a terrible curse when Adam and Eve, our ancient ancestors, decided the overwhelming blessing of the garden, where God was their close and personal companion, wasn't enough. Their sin, their rebellion against God is our rebellion. Their story is our story, the story of the human condition. The great Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn put it this way: "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts." Sin has its own sorry consequences. Our world, crammed with blessing, forever, it seems, stained with a curse. Delight was now tinged with despair. God says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. It will produce thorns and thistles for you." We live in a still beautiful and blessed world, infested, though, with thistles and thorns. A world of war and genocide, cancer and heart disease, poverty and starvation, injustice and exploitation, apathy and evil. Thistles and thorns, they sting hard, they wound. Rebelling against God, we find ourselves experiencing alienation from each other, our material world, and if we're prepared to admit it, alienation from God, the God in whom we were created to live and move and have our very being. Which brings us to our second garden, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Garden of Sorrow and Tears. I'll talk a little more about that later today. Now, please, don't hesitate to be in touch if you have any questions at all about anything I've said today, or any questions about the Christian faith. The contact details are on the screen again, and you can also connect with us via the Wesley Mission website. See you again after this short break.
I think people are amazing. We can turn dark to light. We can fly through storms. We can change worlds, but we can't always do it alone. If you need help, we could work together. Find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
This is Easter Sunrise, brought to you by Wesley Mission.
Welcome back to this Easter Sunrise celebration. This program is being broadcast on Channel 9, Good TV, online and on radio across Australia. Wherever you're watching or listening, I'm thrilled to have you with us, and I hope this morning is a blessing to you. Here at Wesley Mission, we see value in all people. Whatever the circumstance, wherever the need, and whoever it is, we promise to do all we can to provide a helping hand, however we can. A friend of mine, Mick, is a person who, through circumstances out of his control, found himself homeless and on the streets. His life's journey brought him to us, and today I'm pleased to say that Mick can see a bright and hopeful future for himself.
My name's Mick. I'm born and bred in Sydney, or born and bred in the Shire. I lived in Sydney until I was about 13, then I got moved down to Melbourne. I just got bullied and beaten up. Victorian country town, they just hated people from Sydney. Within a month of coming back to Sydney, I dropped out of school because I had no idea what was going on. My father told me that when you go to work, don't come home. It was one where he was going to beat the crap out of me if I returned home, so, there was just no come back to it. That's the last time I've seen my father, sisters, mother. That was that. So you end up on the streets, on the drugs, on the alcohol, homeless and addicted and unable to hold down a job since then. So that was about 30, and I'm at 52 now. After about 15 years of being homeless, drunk, alcohol, I gave up. I thought I was going to die. And I was just waiting for the heart attack to happen. And it did. I woke up and I said, why did you wake me up? I had no reason to go on. But it also stopped me from working, which led me to another bout of homelessness, which led me into Edward Eagle Lodge. Edward Eagle Lodge has a service every Sunday morning. Now, I'd always believed in Jesus, but I'd never been to church. I knew he existed. I knew I wasn't going to heaven. Didn't care. There was nothing to care about. And I just started listening to what was being said. I started becoming with the people, talking with the people and hanging with the people. And all of a sudden I started feeling generous, and I started feeling more that I belonged with these people instead of the people that were with the drugs and the alcohol and the gambling. I love being with people that are with Jesus. I love Phil and Lucy, and I only known them for 3 months. I feel blessed already, even though I'd given up. And even though I'd had heart attacks, I'd had kidney stones, kidney infections that can take you out, all sorts of things, and cancer that could have, that was advanced, not just a local little problem, And I'm still here, and I still had my fellowship. And when I came back, I had people hugging me and praying for me. There's messages every day, It's all God every time, I've got people's numbers on my phone. I never had people's numbers on my phone, only people that I needed to, you got something? Where's the money you owe me, or something like that, or you got what I want, and that, but I've never had anybody that's just a friend that I can ring up and talk to for an hour or so, and that's part of the miracle that God's given me at the moment.
Earlier today, I talked about the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Delight and Despair. I'd now like to look at the Garden of Gethsemane, or as I call it, the Garden of Sorrow and Tears. It was in the garden on the Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem's eastern walls, that Jesus kept a lonely prayer vigil the same night he would eventually be betrayed and arrested. Before they would abandon him for sleep, Jesus told his disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." It's a big statement. I'm so crushed with grief, life is draining from me. Knowing what lay ahead, the sacrifice he would willingly make, the agony and the shame of the cross that was his destiny, blood like sweat literally oozed from his pores, a foretaste of the bloody horrors of Good Friday. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus experienced the crushing weight of our rebellion and alienation and all its terrible consequences, a weight unimaginable. In his lonely night in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was staring death in the face, the death we all deserve, ready to die on our behalf. Jesus knew and embraced the confronting truth that to be our Saviour, he needed to be our sacrifice. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Eden was the garden of delight and despair. Gethsemane, the garden of sorrow and tears. The garden tomb was the garden of victory and triumph. Following his betrayal, arrest and sham trial, Jesus was manhandled west of Jerusalem, just outside the city walls, to a place called Golgotha, where he was crucified. Jesus died an agonizing death, his own broken body acting as executioner as each breath became agonizing, and he eventually succumbed to asphyxiation. At first glance, his final words, a cry, were a declaration of crushing defeat. It is finished! But rather than defeat, the cross was an all-encompassing triumph. With his death, Jesus absorbed into himself all our pain, all our suffering, all our rebellion, all our alienation, all our sin, disarming their power. It is finished. All that needed to be done to reverse the curse of Eden, to destroy the power of sin, was done on the cross. The cross shouts to us that alienation from God, each other, and our world is not the last word, but God's reconciling love is. That love wins. After his death, Jesus' body was taken down from the cross by some friends, prepared for burial and laid in an unused tomb located in the gardens just nearby. A large stone sealed the entrance. For Jesus' friends, this was the end of the road, the final scene of a story so full of promise, now ending in confusion and disappointment. In the darkness of the early morning, some women came to the tomb to tend to Jesus' corpse, as custom required. Astonished, they find the tombstone rolled away, the grave empty, and Jesus' burial clothes neatly folded. At first they think his body has been snatched, stolen. But then, waves of grief crashing over her, Mary has an encounter in the garden with a stranger she doesn't at first recognize. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was a gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus' one-word response to her question is to say Mary's name. Hearing her name spoken, the familiarity and the tenderness of his voice, Mary is the first to recognize that Jesus' body wasn't stolen, but had been supernaturally raised from the dead. This changes everything, everything. For the next 40 days, hundreds of Mary's friends would have similar encounters with Jesus, eyewitnesses to the history-defining reality of his resurrection. Jesus' death and resurrection took place in the same garden setting, which is so very apt, as their meaning cannot be separated. At first glance, Jesus' resurrection was Easter Sunday victory snatched from the jaws of Good Friday defeat. But that wasn't the case. Rather than defeat, the cross was a triumph, the triumph of God's love with the empty tomb and Jesus' resurrection, its vindication, the confirmation of that triumph. With his death and resurrection, Jesus triumphed over sin and death, destroying their power once and for all time and for all people. With the Easter events, death forever loses its sting. Attend a funeral and likely flowers will be prominent, adorning the casket in the church or chapel, at the graveside, in our garden cemeteries. Why? Flowers are vivid reminders of the Christian hope of new life beyond the grave. In the words of English poet George Herbert, death used to be an executioner, but the gospel has made him just a gardener. A little later today, we'll turn our attention to the Garden of the New Jerusalem, or the Garden of Hope and Joy. If you have any questions about anything I've said so far, I encourage you to contact Wesley Mission, and I promise we will be in touch. I'll see you again in a few moments after a break.
I think people are amazing. We can turn dark to light. We can fly through storms. We can change worlds, but we can't always do it alone. If you need help, we could work together. Find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
This is Easter Sunrise, brought to you by Wesley Mission.
Welcome back to this Easter sunrise celebration on Gadigal land from Mrs. Macquarie's chair on the shores of Sydney Harbour. In Australia, we're blessed to have so many wonderful leaders, people and pioneers who are prepared to go the extra mile for the sake of others. Our guest today is one person who is just that. Professor Graeme is known for inventing the cochlear ear, or the bionic ear, that allows people who are deaf or hearing impaired to hear if they so choose. Over the past 40 years, the cochlear ear has changed the lives of over 1 million people and their families in Australia and around the world. Professor Clark welcomes us into his home in Melbourne. You've not always been a Melbourne boy.
I was a Sydney man, and I have a lot of good memories for Sydney, and I now have wonderful memories for Melbourne.
Was it an idyllic childhood?
We were brought up in a country town at a time just after or during and after the Second World War, and it was a wonderful time. I think we were very privileged at that time.
Here in Australia we have a wonderful education system. Were you a motivated student?
I was fortunate in my secondary school education to firstly go to Sydney Boys High because we didn't have a high school at Camden in those days. And then I got a scholarship to the Scots College, and I was a boarder away from home, but I valued that education. Both were very helpful to my later life.
From a very young age, you were known to be saying, I want to be a person who fixes people's ears. What was your motivation for saying something like that?
My father had progressive hearing loss. Not people didn't know much about it. The specialists all just said it'll get worse. And during his career, I learned firsthand what it's like to have a person close to you, deaf, in the family and also in his job. I knew how difficult it was for Dad then, and I have even more admiration for not only what he did, but how he managed his handicap, because later on he even lost the vision in one eye, and he had other medical problems, but accepted them graciously and lived to the age of 96.
During those years, those childhood years, did faith play an important part in your life?
Faith played a very important part of my life, but I really didn't actually make a commitment to being close to Christ until I got through my secondary school training and became a first-year medical student at the University of Sydney, and I went away with a student Christian camp, and the leader said to us in quiet time, why don't you ask Christ into your lives? And I thought, oh, I can't imagine there's much harm in that, and I did, and I had this extraordinary experience of feeling close to someone like I never knew, and peace and joy. And I thought, if this is real, I want to investigate it like a
good scientist does.
So really, over a few years, I was growing slowly in my faith. I hadn't really any idea what the Bible meant. So I tried to get some understanding, and I tried to live it in my life, not knowing quite how.
When you started your scientific work, your bionic ear work, effectively, you were described by one colleague as a clown. There was opposition almost from straight away. How did you find dealing with that sort of ridicule and opposition?
Difficult, to say the least. I mean, I was starting as the youngest professor, clinical professor in this country. I was feeling hurt by all the criticism. I prayed for my colleagues. I can tell you it wasn't easy because the hurt was great, but unless I really genuinely prayed, I did not get the relief. That's how I really found the teachings that Christ was giving me was helpful to my career.
Along the way you had some eureka moments, some moments where the work really leapt forward. Can you talk to us about some of those?
There were some absolutely fantastic eureka moments, and they all seemed logical and appropriate at the time. The first was when I was finishing my PhD in brain science, I came to realise that it didn't help understand how the brain could be benefited by single channel stimulation at the time. And I had this inspiration that it needed to select out very special frequencies and stimulate the inner ear. That was the first eureka moment. Then, in order to do that, I had to put a bundle of electrodes, not being done at the time, into this tiny, tiny inner ear we have, only 1.5 millimetres in diameter, and it wouldn't go. And I had done all that was needed to get my first patient ready for these critical tests. I hadn't got an electrode. And we went away on holidays at Graeme, and I was meant to be looking after the girls who were swimming in the surf. And I couldn't avoid looking at a shell a little like this. And I saw this on the beach, and I was playing around with glass. You see, it's got a flexible tip, and if I put it into the cochlea and I insert it...
It's like an ear, isn't it?
It is similar, and there you see, it's gone right around. And we couldn't do that. And I was so excited, I told the family, look, I'm cutting back the holidays.
2 days earlier you came back from holidays.
We're going back to Melbourne, and it worked on the human temporal bone, and it was the basis for most cochlear implant electrodes ever since.
Truly a eureka moment.
Yes, and the critical eureka moment was when I had operated on Rod.
Rod Saunders, this was, yeah.
And we didn't know whether Rod would hear or not. We didn't know anything about the sensations in those days. And he heard vowels, and with hearing these vowels that gave him speech for the first time ever that someone had been able to give someone speech without the need to lip read.
How did that lead to this? So can you explain to us the significance of this?
This is the cochlear implant, the most recent one, and it has an aerial that receives information from outside. The signals that come through are then sent into the electronic section in the titanium package. This is the electrode that goes into the inner ear, as the grass blade did in a shell.
And then finally we have this box here, which has got all sorts of electronics in it. This is the pack that is made available for those who receive cochlear implants.
This is those who are delivering cochlear implants, not the patient per se, but the range of cochlear implants now is so great. I mean, it can be used for both ears, it can be used with ears with residual hearing, and even remotely controlled so that the results in the clinic can be, or the patient's results can be said by radio or wireless back to the clinic. So these are the very sophisticated electronics that have developed as a result.
I can't help but notice there's something missing here. Can you tell us what's missing?
Hopefully for the totally implantable cochlear implant, when everything is implanted under the ears.
So that's for the future, is it?
We hope so.
About a year or so after you operated on Rod Saunders, there was a second operation on another patient. What did that enable you to do in moving the technology forward?
Well, when I'd successfully operated on Rod and we'd given him speech, the doubters all said, you've just discovered a specific code for Rod Saunders. It's not really going to help lots and lots of people. And then the owner of Cochlear or Telectronics, they wanted to know whether other people would benefit because they couldn't go to the marketplace. It was only for one person. So one of the people that had come forward, George Watson. He did well, and finally we had to have a third before Cochlear, as it became, said they would be able to develop it. All the time the government was supporting this until they got FDA approval. It actually was the second successful industrial development carried out by this country. And I was so impressed with the way they managed it.
And then in 1990, again, the Food and Drug Administration gave approval for cochlear implants for children up to the age of 18.
Yes. Quite frankly, that was what I really hoped for, to be able to help profoundly deaf children. I had a heart for children. And then in 1990, it became the first advance in helping children communicate in the last 250 years, since they were shown to be helped by sign language of the deaf.
Professor Clark, do you have any idea how many people have been assisted by cochlear technology since your invention was released into the market?
The recent celebration was that there have been 1 million people.
And it's opened up a whole new pathway for technology, for medical technology in particular. And there's work going on in bionics, for example, with eyes. Can you talk to us about that?
It has opened up not only the possibility of helping blind people, but another area close to my heart is people who are paralysed with paraplegia. It's also helped to find a way of helping epileptic people. And the University of Melbourne graciously has recently created the Graeme Institute for Biomedical Engineering, which I hope will do more than even that and help a lot of people with different handicaps.
As you look ahead, as a medical scientist, as someone who has overseen and been there when these quite remarkable breakthroughs have happened, what breakthroughs are you looking forward to seeing happen in the coming years?
When I started, it said there were two frontiers in medicine. One was genetic engineering, and the other was understanding brain function. I chose brain function, and I'm not just interested in helping deaf people alone. I want to understand what goes on inside our brain, how it's related to consciousness. That is the big question no one has an answer to at the moment.
As you exercise that gift of hindsight, as you look back over this storied career that you've enjoyed, what gives you the most satisfaction? What pleases you the most?
I think what pleases me most is the joy that deaf people have in getting a cochlear implant. It really is most moving. Adults, yes, changes their lives. Children gives them a life. And I have so many thank yous, testimonies, miracles in their lives. That is so wonderful.
One of those would be enough, but to have so many of them must be quite remarkable. This is an Easter sunrise service that we're having this conversation for. Professor Clark, what does Easter mean for you? What's the significance of Easter?
Well, Easter Sunday does mean hope and joy. The fact that Christ rose and the fact that we're celebrating that is really a miracle. That everything that I've learned shows that there is a supernatural as well as natural events. And for me, that is what it really means.
Professor Clark, it's been such a joy-filled privilege for us to spend this time with you in your home. Thank you so much for your hospitality. Thank you for sharing your story with us, at least just a small part of it. Thank you for the incredible contribution you've made to millions of lives, not just here in Australia, but around the world. We are incredibly grateful.
I would like to once again thank Professor Clark for opening his home to us and for sharing his wonderful achievement with the world. Earlier today, I talked about the Garden of Eden, or the Garden of Delight and Despair, and the Garden of Gethsemane, or the Garden of Sorrow and Tears. I'd now like to talk about the Garden of the New Jerusalem, or the Garden of Hope and Joy. The story of creation begins with the Garden of Eden, a garden of blessing and delight, a garden that is lost to a curse and its despair. And all because of Easter, the story of creation ends with a garden restored, with Eden recovered, but a very different Eden. John has a vision of it, a garden set in a new city, in a new remade heaven and earth. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. The promise of Easter is that God will make all things new. Indeed, is making all things new. Tim Keller puts it this way: the resurrection means not merely that Christians have a hope for the future, but they have a hope that comes from the future. This hope isn't simply wishful thinking or a vague desire, but a sure and certain hope, a hope that you can stake and shape your life on. In the world to come, a world made new by God, there will be no more crying or pain, no more tears or sorrow, no more loss or grief, no more death, only joy, because the old order of things will have passed away forever. The sure and certain hope of Easter is that one day everything sad will become untrue. For just over a year now, we've been simultaneously horrified by the brutality of war, an evil invasion and killing of the innocents, while at the same time inspired by the resilient courage of the Ukrainian people. Soon after the war began, there was an article in the Times of London about springtime in Kiev, a city rightly proud of the beauty of its gardens. The rubble of war all around them, the mayor and the city's residents are defiantly planting spring flowers. This is what the article says. In a freshly dug verge on the edge of St. Sophia's Square, city gardeners were planting out purple pansies to bring spring colour to the city. War is war, but flowers still need to be planted, one of the gardeners said. She wanted Kiev to look beautiful again. War is war, but flowers still need to be planted. Friends, we live in a world where flowers still need to be planted. Easter faith means that we have a sure and certain hope that God is making all things new. Easter faith invites us to participate with God in that revolutionary mission. Speaking of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, C.S. Lewis says, "The rightful King has landed." You may say landed in disguise, and is calling us to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. Here at Wesley Mission, our mission is to continue the work of Jesus Christ in word and in deed. Continuing Jesus' work means planting flowers. Every time we serve those most in need, we are planting flowers. Every time we advocate for justice, for the forgotten and for the forsaken, we are planting flowers. Every time we tell the story of Jesus and his transforming love, we are planting flowers. Every time we pioneer a new service, establish a new office, or step into a new region, we are planting flowers. Every act of compassion, every act of Christ-like service, every courageous commitment to go the extra mile in making a difference, we are planting flowers. And every time we plant a new flower, we are colouring our grey world with hope, love, and joy. Friends, this Easter, my prayer for you is that you would know and experience the gift that is yours when you place your faith and your trust in Jesus, crucified and risen, a sure and certain hope that will carry you forward into eternity and which will infuse you with that kind of joy first experienced by Mary at the garden tomb. Now, if you have any questions about anything I've said today or about the Easter story, I encourage you to contact Wesley Mission, and I promise, we'll be in touch. I'll see you again in a few moments.
I think people are amazing. We can turn dark to light. We can fly through storms. We can change worlds, but we can't always do it alone. If you need help, we could work together. Find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
This is Easter Sunrise, brought to you by Wesley Mission.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning as we've started our Easter day here on the shores of Sydney Harbour, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Whatever Easter means to you and your loved ones, I hope you'll find a fresh and perhaps deeper appreciation of the importance of Easter and of God's love for all people. In a moment, Soul Purpose will be back again to sing How Great Thou Art. But first, a short prayer from the chaplains at Wesley Mission.
God, our hearts are full of joy today.
The sun rises and Jesus is risen.
Easter means hope.
With grace and mercy.
With love and compassion.
And there is hope for everyone who would receive it.
We see so much pain and suffering.
People who are hurting and lonely.
Families without a safe home.
Lives destroyed by gambling.
Heartache all around us.
And even within us.
But Jesus, you know our pain.
You've suffered alongside us.
You've taken it all on yourself.
And your arms are stretched open wide.
You have overwhelmed death with love.
As a new day begins, make us new.
Soften our hearts with compassion.
Inspire us to work for justice.
Lead us to people in need.
As we open our hands and lives.
This Easter, we pray for peace.
Peace in our homes.
Peace in our community.
In every state and territory.
Peace in our nation.
Peace around the world.
And peace in our hearts.
We pray for humanity.
For all people around the world.
Empower us to share your hope.
Your compassion and love.
Love that crosses all borders and boundaries.
That speaks to our soul.
That leads us to change.
And that connects us to each other.
Consider all the
I really hope you can offer an amen to that prayer and how great thou art. Easter is a very special time of the year. It can mean so many different things to different people, but common to us all is that this weekend gives us time to stop and reflect on the things that are important and also bigger than us. I hope you can find time at some point to consider what the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ can mean for you and how the new and eternal life that is available to us all might resonate. Church doors right across Australia and the world will be open today, and the message, told in different ways, will be the same. The Easter story offers new beginnings, a fresh start, and an eternal hope for humanity. Now, if you've just joined us and have missed this Easter sunrise celebration and would like to watch or listen to it again, head over to the Wesley Mission website and follow the links. It'll be available on our website in just a few moments. Thank you once again to Professor Graeme Clark, Soul Purpose, the Wesley Mission Chaplains, and especially to you. Happy Easter and God bless.